NTV Wild Talk in partnership with the Kenya Wildlife Service and Wildlife Direct.
Hello and welcome to NTV Wild Talk with me, Smriti Vidyarthi. Today we're coming to you from the Kenya Wildlife Service headquarters, and in particular we are actually standing outside the Forensic and Genetics Lab. Now this is a very critical place and we'll tell you why in just a moment. Joining me now is Patrick Omondi. Good to have you back on the show, Patrick. Now you are of course the Deputy Director of Species Management and Conservation here at KWS, but you also oversee everything that happens behind this green gate.
Yes.
Tell us, why is this a very, very important part of KWS?
This is a Kenyan lab. It's the only lab in Kenya that deals with wildlife forensics in the country. And it's a very important lab because it helps in the fight against wildlife trafficking. So the lab was commissioned last year in May by the Cabinet Secretary, and since that time we've been able to use the lab, evidence from the lab, to help us in our courts. Our prosecutors have been using it, and this lab is supposed to serve not only the Kenyan public, but also the Eastern and Central Africa.
All right, and
Yes.
Patrick, for those who perhaps don't even know what forensics mean, explain that to us.
Wildlife forensic helps us in using the DNA, in knowing if you catch, for example, a poacher with a bushmeat, you'll be able to analyze and discover that this is a dik-dik, this is a giraffe, and the use of forensic is when an animal is done, just like in human forensic.
Yeah.
This is now the wildlife forensic that is happening here.
And in what way does this help fight wildlife crime? You touched on that, but what happens in there that then leads to the next step and eventually leads to the capturing of a poacher or the halting of poaching?
When you seize and let's say game meat, because the cases that we mostly analyze here are cases of bushmeat, those who kill animals.
Yeah.
They had become so sophisticated. They were demoning the animals. You have a lean meat, and it was difficult to know whether this is a giraffe, this is a buffalo, or a dik-dik.
Right.
So this lab is able now to do the analysis to establish that this is not a normal meat like a beef or a mutton, and they say you are caught with this meat, analyze it here and establish that this is indeed a buffalo or a giraffe. When our expert from the lab gives this evidence, our prosecutors now can confirm to the accused that yes, you are involved in wildlife poaching, and you are poaching a buffalo.
Okay.
So that is why this lab is important. Again, in the fight against elephant, ivory and rhino horn trafficking, we anticipate that this lab will be able to help in establishing the origin. If, for example, there's a seizure in Vietnam of ivory, like the recent seizure, we'll take samples there because we have active port. Ivory passes through Mombasa, and sometimes this ivory seized in Vietnam is not Kenyan ivory.
Right.
So we'll take samples, do a DNA profiling in this lab, and establish the source. Not at the country level, even at the area level.
Wow.
We'll be able to say this ivory passed Mombasa, it was seized in Vietnam, it passed through Thailand. The Vietnamese were able to seize it at their port, and then after this analysis here, we'll say it is from DRC Congo.
And that's all thanks to the work that happens in here. So it is very critical. Thanks very much, Patrick.
Yes.
I'm looking forward to head on in there in just a moment. Come with me. The poaching of wildlife and the trafficking of wildlife is a serious offence, and it happens far too often. But one of the biggest challenges is proving a suspect guilty and finding evidence. And that's why what happens here in the forensic lab is really important. I'm about to head in now to meet Dr. Moses Otiende to find out much more about what goes on. Hi, Doctor.
How are you?
Good. How are you?
Fine.
All right. Great to meet you, and thank you for joining us on the show.
Thank you very much for coming.
Tell us now, where are we exactly?
You are at the Forensic and Genetics Lab here at Kenya Wildlife Service.
Okay.
And this is the DNA extraction room.
All right, the DNA extraction room. We'll find out what happens in just a moment. But first of all, Doctor, tell us exactly what your role is here.
My role in this lab is I'm the head of the lab, who is in charge of processing evidence. That is exhibits that come to me from various places in the country of wildlife origin. So I process them and then submit that evidence in court.
Wow, so really your job is very critical. Now, what are we looking at here? Because of course, when a heinous act takes place out in the wild, if somebody has, killed a buffalo or whatever it might be, one of the biggest challenges is finding that evidence. And what is this here?
Yeah, what you can see here are exhibits that have been submitted to us for analysis. They can start from daggers and then processed animal skins. You can see these are processed animal skin.
Okay, can you show us one of the daggers?
Yeah, the daggers you can see there. Then they have a lot of they have samples. You can see they have blood.
Oh, so this is dried up blood?
Yes, so most of these are arrested in these people's houses, and we need to get DNA from this and then tell which animal was used to kill this.
Wow, so from this blood, once you've tested, you're able then to tell what animal it is that was killed with this dagger?
Exactly.
That's amazing. And who brings in this evidence?
This evidence are brought by our enforcement officers, police. Once they arrest these people in the act, they arrest them with any form of exhibit. They then submit them to the lab following a chain of custody procedure.
Right, okay.
Yes.
Show us what else you have here then.
So we have ivory. You can see this is processed ivory.
Can I hold that?
Yeah, you can.
Wow, this is actual ivory. I mean, it does feel quite heavy, and processed, by that you mean that it's obviously been cut into this shape?
Yeah, into this shape. So you cannot be able to tell it from just looking at it. It just looks like a piece of wood.
Yes.
So you cannot not be able to tell whether it is ivory or not.
So what would you do with this?
So what we'll do with this, we take it into an ivory crusher. Okay. We have a pulverizing machine. So we use this to crush ivory in here into baby powder.
Wow.
So once we crush that ivory, then we're able to decalcify, and then from there we just take it through the normal DNA extraction process.
Wow, so using this machine, which I can imagine is very expensive,
yes,
this hard ivory will be turned into powder?
Yes, that is done by this machine.
Are we able to do that, or is that for a later date?
No, that's for a later date.
Okay,
yes.
Fine. Okay, so that is key in the process, and then what else?
So this area, as you can see, we can actually extract DNA using two methods.
Okay.
We have the mechanical method, where we just do it using a couple of paraphernalias like what you can see here.
Right.
Those are just pipettes, and then using this DNA kit. So we have one that can do fungus, can get DNA from tissues, or you can use the automated system that is the car cube. Okay. So it does it for you automatically. So you just load all your reagents in there, and then you're able to actually extract DNA from there. And then from there you can process that DNA.
So let's take the example of the blood.
Yes.
From that knife, how do you extract the blood, and then what do you come here and do?
So from the knife, we just, let me just get the knife.
Yeah, sure. I'll hold on to that.
Yeah. So
wow.
from the knife, usually we just swab we just swab the knife using some swabs, and then put it into tubes, like that. So these tubes, once we put them there, then we add some lysis buffers that breaks the blood into smaller pieces, and then we are able to remove the hemoglobin in blood, and then extract DNA from it. Wow. So in the end of the day, we end up with DNA that we are able to process, and we can even quantify the amount of DNA we have using the spectrophotometer.
Using some of these machines?
Yeah, this machine here.
Oh, right,
Yeah.
okay. So once that is done,
Yeah.
then what?
So from extraction of DNA,
Yeah.
usually we have got primers and other reagents that we use to amplify target DNA that can tell us, identify a species.
Oh,
So
really?
we have a couple of genes.
Uh-huh.
One of them is called the cytochrome oxidase 1.
Wow, that's a long word.
Yes.
Okay.
So this particular gene can tell species apart.
Okay.
So it can tell a leopard, it can tell a buffalo, it can tell livestock apart.
Do you have that here? I mean, what is it in the form of?
We have a library, a genetic library that is in an e-copy.
Oh,
so what we do usually...
an electronic version?
Yes, electronic version. So what we do usually is, once we extract the DNA, then take it through the process, we end up with a gene, with a DNA library.
Right.
Then we compare it to the library that we already have.
I see. All right. So do you have more of... Let's follow more of the process.
Yeah.
Okay, gosh. And Moses, what perhaps does it take for someone who wants to become a forensic lab doctor like you?
Yeah, it requires to have knowledge in molecular biology and some in-depth understanding of genetics, so that you're able to understand the processes and then able to do this kind of work.
All right, it doesn't sound easy at all. We are now, though, in a different room, so
Yes,
tell us, where
so
are we?
Where we are, this is called the polymerase chain reaction, the PCR room.
Okay.
This is where we mix our reagents. So we have a couple of enzymes, as like what my colleague is doing here. So there are a number of enzymes that are mixed together in a tube. That then from there, then you add DNA in it, and then it's able to make many copies of the target DNA. For example, the one I told you about, the cytochrome oxidase 1,
Yes.
for species identification. So what it's doing here is just trying to mix these reagents together, and then from there we shall take them to a separate room where we're going to do the real amplification of the DNA.
Right, so also a lot of work. Okay, well, thank you. We'll let you get on with it.
Okay.
It does sound quite technical. And why do you have, for example, a fridge in here? I'm just observing this room, and there's quite a lot of interesting equipment.
Yeah, this room actually has got a lot of chemicals. As I said, we have got enzymes that are very unstable, so that we need to keep in very low temperatures.
Okay.
And also, there are also some primers, for example, that are also required to be kept under specialized conditions, like -20 and -4.
Okay.
Then also you can see we have our distiller here that we used. We need to have DNA-free water that doesn't have any contamination.
I see.
So we're able to use the water you see there to do our PCRs.
So when the DNA leaves this room, what state is it in?
It's in the liquid state in a tube.
Right.
So where we are going now is the post-PCR room, where we have got a machine
Okay.
that we're going to just put the DNA inside, and then it's going to make several copies of that particular gene that we're looking for.
Right.
So that will
here we
happen inside a machine, and this is a thermocycler. So this machine here is called a thermocycler. So you'll put a thermocycler.
Okay.
So it makes many copies of a target gene, because you already have primers in your mix.
Right.
It's going to amplify that many times. And then once that is done, this could take maybe an hour or two, depending on the target gene.
Yeah.
Then you'll need to go and take it to a stage where you need to see.
Okay.
Look at it on a gel, and then be able to see if you have the right size of the fragment.
All right, and it looks like that's being done as well. Can you explain that to us as
yeah, like
does this?
what she's doing now is she's just going to add DNA into the wells. You can see the wells there.
Yes.
So from her samples that she has here, she will add them systematically into these wells. And then after she does that,
and these are the samples here.
no, these are the samples.
Oh, okay.
These are, because she needs to, there's a dye here, you can see the dye here, you mix it with the DNA so that you're able to see them.
Okay.
There, and then this thing has got something called ethidium bromide that intercalates DNA, so that if you take a photo of it, you can be able to see on top of the gel.
Right.
Yes.
Gosh, such a process to find out where that blood has come from, which animal.
Yeah.
Okay, so then what happens?
After that, then the gel is taken into a visualization machine, like what you can see she's doing.
Yeah.
So she'll put it under there. There's a UV light that usually comes from below the gel. So from the UV light, you're able to read and see if you have the right sizes of the gene of interest.
And what is the right size?
So it depends now with the gene you're targeting. Like for species ID, usually we do 600 base pairs of a target gene. So after we get that, then we're able to sequence and then run it against our library, and then you'll be able to say that the unknown could be giraffe or a gazelle or whatever it is.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's what's happening here.
Yeah.
Great.
So then you can see the gel has run.
Yes.
And you can be able to see the bands there, showing
Yeah.
you that the DNA was actually in the sample that you're looking for. And then you can take a photo using that.
Ah,
Yeah.
okay. That's amazing. Right, and then what happens after
So
this?
once we finish that process, then we store our samples into the you can come with me. You can come store the samples into our freezers. Yeah.
Freezers here, and
Yeah.
this is one of the big ones. So come round.
So you can see we have different samples labeled for different animals. We have the rhino compartment where we have rhino samples.
Oh my goodness me!
Then
wow.
we have elephants, a number of samples. That's where we store them after we are done with the analysis,
Why are they stored in such cold temperature?
so that we don't lose them. They don't go bad, because you see in a case somebody can appeal
Yeah.
against your results, and they want to seek a second opinion.
Yeah.
Then you need to give them the sample, and then they can go and test it wherever they wish to do it.
Okay, and then on this door, what I notice is a long piece of paper.
Yeah.
What is this for? How relevant
Yeah,
is this?
this chain of custody paper for temperature charting. So every single day the piece of paper is printed. It gives us temperature times on specific times of the day.
Right.
So you're able to check and keep them and be able to see you're maintaining the right temperatures for each sample. So in case there's a problem, then this thing will give you an SMS telling you that there's a problem with the machine, so you can come and check it.
Really? You
Yes.
get sent a text message?
Yes, yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
How long is the process, for example, from when you receive the dagger that has some blood on it to, the end of the entire procedure?
Yeah, the process takes about 2 days
Uh-huh.
to do it, from the extraction to PCR to the gel, and then after that we do the final analysis and generate a forensic report. It takes
Okay.
about 2 days.
About 2 days in
Yes.
total.
Yeah.
Right, and how successful has this lab been in finding the right DNA and producing, the relevant evidence?
Now, the lab has been very successful since its inception last year, that is 2015 May. We have been able to successfully analyze 130 cases.
Really?
We have succeeded in getting 10 convictions,
Wow.
and at least 50% of those cases now are just awaiting judgment.
Okay.
The rest are just pending in court.
And what, in your opinion, are some of the challenges that you face in the lab and working with such intricate details?
Yeah, one of the biggest challenges, of course, is resources, because most of this equipment, as you see them, they are quite expensive.
Yeah.
They are very hard, they require a lot of money to maintain. The reagents we use are also very expensive. And then also working with the enforcement officer, chain of custody issues are still a problem.
Right.
Sometimes some people submit samples without exhibit memo forms. Some people submit samples without proper labels.
Yeah.
So those things are they have an impact on the outcome of a case.
Okay.
Because when a case doesn't have a complete detail, then it stands a high chance of us losing it.
Okay, and of course those are just some of the challenges that I'll touch on later in the show, but for now, Moses, thank you so much to you and your team for the great work you're doing here in the forensics lab. All right, with me, Dr. Moses Otiende. He is the head of this KWS forensics lab, a very, very critical place. We, though, are now taking a short break on NTV Wild Talk. You can chime into the conversation. The hashtag is NTV Wild on Twitter, and leave your comments on our Facebook page, NTV Wild. We'll be back in just a moment. Welcome back to NTV Wild Talk with me, Smriti Vidyarthi, coming to you from the KWS headquarters here in Nairobi. We are outside the Forensic and Genetics Lab. And with me is Florence Magoma. She is the head of prosecutions at KWS. Welcome to NTV Wild Talk, Florence.
Thank you.
Now, what is the role of the head of prosecutions?
The role of Head of Prosecutions Kenya Wildlife Service is to prosecute wildlife matters which are criminal in nature. And in prosecuting these wildlife crimes, the prosecutor prosecutes mostly ivory-related crimes, poaching-related crimes, also prosecutes matters with regard to bushmeat and any other wildlife offences which have been committed out there.
Right, and Florence, now earlier in the show we were in the forensics lab,
Yes.
and we saw what goes on there when, you know, evidence is provided to the lab.
Yes.
And we noticed the whole structure. Where do you then come in? Is it at the end of the forensic lab chain?
Currently, we are doing a prosecution-led investigation, and in most cases, it is a duty of the prosecutor to advise the investigators on how to collect this evidence and where to collect this evidence, mostly in terms of collection of the evidence. And mostly we advise in terms of chain of custody and how this evidence is supposed to be collected from the scene and taken to the forensic analyst, and then the analyst is able to do the analysis and provide the report, which is usually taken to court during a hearing, and then the exhibit is tendered before court.
Right, and that's where we left it
Yes.
at the forensic lab. Actually, we were at the point of now everything goes to court.
Yes.
So what's your role when it comes to that?
Well, as a prosecutor, when you receive a file and you have all the exhibits inside the file, including the report that you get from the analyst, it is your duty to determine which evidence is relevant before court. Then it is the duty of the prosecutor to call the evidence, to call the witnesses who attend court. And in terms of the exhibits concerning the report from the analyst, you are required to call the analyst before court to provide a systematic analysis on how they conducted the examination of the exhibit,
Right.
and also inform the court on the procedures that were used and the determination at the end of the day, what was the finding of the analyst. If it is ivory, then it is the duty of the analyst to tell the court that after their analysis, they were able to determine that this is ivory or this is rhino.
Right, it
Yes.
doesn't sound like an easy job,
Yes,
Florence.
it is not.
What are some of the key challenges that you face, because you're dealing with very, very sensitive issues?
Yes. As a prosecution, we have several challenges. First, I would want to mention that we have a bit of challenges with the law as it is. We have a new law that came into place in 2013-2014. The law provides for stiffer penalties in the same, but in the same breath, the laws are not very clear. And then we get a bit of challenges in terms of producing the evidence in court, because the laws are contested by probably the defense counsels. So in terms of producing the evidence in court, we realize we also have challenges in terms of chain of custody, how these exhibits have been handled by the scene.
Right.
We also realize that the work of investigation and collection of evidence is not only the work of Kenya Wildlife Service. It is done by other state actors who are the police. And if this knowledge is not disseminated to the police and other agencies, then we realize that we have a problem with lost exhibits, a problem with chain of custody, and then at the end of the day, we do not get the results we expect to get from the courts. So yes, that is the problem we have.
But no doubt, having said that, there have been some successes. I
Yes.
mean, one of the key successes is that Faisal, the huge ivory trafficker,
Yes.
is now behind bars. How did we get to that?
We as KWS, of course, together working with the ODPP, were actually very happy to know that we have done a matter, and at the end of the day we have concluded and ensured that someone who was involved in trafficking has been jailed for at least 20 years. We are aware that there's an appeal at the High Court, but we're also aware that as the DPP has lodged a cross appeal again in contesting the sentence and asking the court to review the sentence and make it a bit stiffer. In such a case, we understand that ivory is just not a national, it's not just a national issue. It's a transnational. It is a transnational nature. So in these cases, we realize that we have a lot of issues. It is also involves organized crime. It involves cyber crime, and at the end of the day, it also involves terrorism. So in prosecuting these offences, together, of course, with the stakeholders like the ODPP, we are able to work together and ensure we put the people like
Faisal behind bars.
Yes.
And do we have enough prosecutors? Are there enough people that are trained to do the kind of work that's required to get people behind bars?
As of now, Kenya Wildlife Service has only 3 prosecutors.
Only?
Me being one of them. We have another one at the head office and another one at the Savo Conservation Area. With the collaboration we have with the DPP, because the DPP covers the whole country, we ensure that we are able to collaborate, we communicate, and also exchange information. But we also need to have a bigger capacity. As Kenya Wildlife Service, we have been training about 10 or so prosecutors who would be able to back up our prosecution in different areas, and also to be able to follow through and see that prosecutions are done and that we get conviction rates going up.
All right,
Yes.
Florence, it doesn't sound easy at all,
It
but
isn't.
well done for being at least amongst the 3 prosecutors
Thank you.
that are working to fight wildlife crime. Thanks very much for joining us
Thank you.
on NTV Wild Talk.
Thank you very much.
And joining me now on the show is Shamini Jayanathan. She is the legal director for the organisation Space for Giants. Great to have you back on the show.
Thank you.
Now, Shamini, what is the connection between Space for Giants and the Kenya Wildlife Service? What are you doing?
Well, very recently we've just been training the new tranche of KWS prosecutors closely with Kenya Wildlife Service, the DPP's office and the Training Institute of CID, and with the support of UNODC. So we've just completed a month's training with them.
So there really is going to be a new KWS prosecution unit. What is that going to consist of exactly?
There should hopefully be about 10 new gazetted prosecutors in time, hopefully in the next few months, with delegated powers of prosecution from the DPP. And they will be able to conduct prosecutions for Kenya Wildlife Service in-house.
And where does your training come into this? Because why are you the one training these new prosecutors?
I've been a criminal barrister for about 15 years before I moved to Kenya in 2012. I've worked in this field mainly in the context of counterterrorism in Kenya and Somalia, and then more recently in the field of wildlife trafficking. And the fact is, I know that to be a prosecutor, whatever the skill, whatever the type of law you're dealing with, the skills are essentially the same, whether it's terrorism, wildlife trafficking, murder, rape. And so I think that that's why we've been able to offer something through Space for Giants to Kenya Wildlife Service that's of value. It's a very practical, practitioner-based course.
And when you look at what existed of KWS prosecutors or whatever sort of prosecution unit they had, what is it that you feel needed to really be improved and revamped?
I think, first of all, the Kenya Wildlife Service is now aligning its prosecutions with the National Prosecution Policy. So they're much more in tune with the ODPP. And the Director of Public Prosecutions has shown real initiative and leadership by offering his staff, his experienced prosecutors, to Kenya Wildlife Service to help train them and mentor them. And that makes a huge difference, I think, to the professionalism and the ability of such a unit to progress its cases to trial readiness.
And how critical is it that Kenya does progress its cases and, improve its prosecution unit? Where does Kenya stand right now?
I think Kenya has a very strong reputation, and I say that because, first of all, a lot of the initiatives taken by the DPP and the Judicial Training Institute in this country are being replicated across the continent.
Oh, really?
In Uganda, in Botswana, in Tanzania, to name but a few. And so I think this is simply taking it to another level.
What are some of the biggest challenges in your view? I mean, earlier I spoke to the head of the prosecutions here at KWS, but from your perspective, based on your experience, what are the biggest issues that we face here?
I think when you're looking at trying to build capacity in any criminal justice system, what we want to achieve is for it to be sufficiently to have a deterrent effect upon would-be criminals. And there are 3 components to that. One is strong prosecutions, one is trial without delay, and the third is proportionate and consistent sentencing. And from my point of view, we're working very hard on the strong prosecutions. I think the Judicial Training Institute, the Office of the Chief Justice, has done a lot of work to sensitise the judiciary. But what I see as the biggest challenges are the fact that trials still take far too long. And because the new Wildlife Act has imposed very high minimum penalties, it guarantees a trial. And where you have a system where you have really a culture of adjournments and trials taking 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, with all the problems that bring, that's a real hindrance to real success.
But why is that happening, do you think? And does corruption play a role in this at all?
Corruption may well play a role in this. I think that there is almost a habit, perhaps, or an acceptance that is the way it is. If somebody doesn't turn up to court, we'll just grant an adjournment. And I think that what needs to happen there is, if the judiciary are as concerned about delay as I think they are, they certainly say they are, then the answer is to empower the Chief Justice to issue set up a rules committee in the same way that he's done for civil cases, and to issue rules that are legally binding, so to enable magistrates to really grip cases and make the parties, prosecution and defence, play their part and reduce delay in the court system. And in the same vein, set up a sentencing committee, in my view, under the sentencing policy that was launched earlier this year, in order to issue sentencing guidelines and do away with minimum penalties, because they only clog up the system with more trials. And more importantly, when you're talking about organised crime, there is no incentive for the little man caught at the bottom to then give evidence and assist the authorities, because there's no lesser sentence that he can get.
Right. Well, speaking about sentences and the Wildlife Act as well, where does the law come in? Because we do have a Wildlife Act and a law that says, if you are caught poaching, for example, it's 20 million shilling fine and or life in prison as well.
Yeah.
But are we ever actually seeing that happen?
Space for Giants monitors cases. We have about 30 cases that we're keeping an eye on up in north and central Kenya. And we work with Kenya Wildlife Service and the ODPP up there and the judiciary to sort of monitor these cases and offer assistance where requested, if needed. And we are seeing a slow shift. We are seeing magistrates starting to impose heavier penalties. You would have seen in the papers recently in Nanuki, somebody with 2 leopard skins, I think he got 5 years imprisonment.
Right.
We've had a couple of ivory cases where they've had 5 years imprisonment or a heavy fine. But I think at the end of the day, there are still problems in that Wildlife Conservation Management Act. I see 3 problems in it. Number one, some of the drafting of offences have left some of us in the legal profession, shall I say, underwhelmed.
Really?
With the way in which they've been drafted. It's caused real problems for charging, and so that needs urgent amendment. Secondly, as I said, the high minimum penalties, removing all judicial discretion, but at the same time, removing any opportunity to incentivize guilty pleas and assistance to the prosecution or the police is a problem.
Yeah.
And I understand why it's there. We see serious crime, we think we want to send out a strong message, but everything else has to work.
Yeah.
And if you simply have high minimum penalties in a system that can take 2 or 3 years, and these are complex cases where often you do need somebody on the inside to help, then that's counterproductive. And also what we're seeing is having a heavy term of imprisonment or a fine is we're seeing a lot of these sentences consist of a heavy fine or imprisonment in default.
Right.
And so what that ultimately boils down to is the poor man goes to prison and the rich, the well-connected, or those of value in an organised criminal network, they'll walk.
And Shamini, how easy or difficult is it then to address some of these issues that you're talking about?
Well, amendments have already been drafted, and I think they've been submitted. So hopefully those changes in the legislation can start moving us towards a better situation. And I think Kenya has made real progress already in a very short space of time with the creation of toolkits, which the DPP's office led the way with Kenya Wildlife Service to create, and that's being replicated, as I say, across the continent. And with interagency protocols being agreed that bring together investigators and prosecutors closer together, this new vision for Kenya Wildlife Service's prosecution unit that has the support. I think what Kenya has done extremely well with these institutions is they've all been very willing to work together, which I think shows real strength and confidence by the institutions themselves.
And ultimately, what is your hope for the future? For example, in the next year or so, where do you want to see the KWS prosecution unit and everything that comes with it?
I'd like to see the Kenya Wildlife Service prosecution unit really working in partnership with the ODPP, supporting and alleviating some of the burden on the ODPP, because obviously the DPP's office covers all crime. And also providing a really high quality service on the continent within a wildlife agency, and ensuring not just strong prosecutions but strong investigations and progression all the way through to trial.
All right, Shamini, thanks so much for joining us on NTV Wild Talk.
Pleasure.
With me, Shamini Jayanathan, the Legal Director for Space for Giants. All right, from that conversation, we are now shifting focus on the show. It's time for our wild guess question. What does one need to have knowledge and understanding of to work in a forensic lab? What does one need to have knowledge and understanding of to work in a forensic lab? To participate, just like the NTV Wild Facebook page and post your answer on the post associated with this question. Terms and conditions apply. The first person to answer correctly gets 1 night for 2 at the wonderful Westwood Hotel, plus free entry to any national park of their choice and a gift hamper courtesy of Wildlife Direct and a bottle of wine courtesy of Wines of the World. Last week's lucky winner was Sally Mwanga. And now here is our Wild Pick segment. This is John Kangethe at the Maimahiu viewpoint en route to Masai Mara. He was posing on the car after showing clients the amazing view of the Great Rift Valley. John says they were heading to the Mara for the migration experience. And in the Masai Mara itself, this is Joseph Wakaba. This was a selfie with his 2 Chinese friends with elephants in the background. Joseph says he loves watching nature, and animals in parks have a value that can't be measured. And in the blue jacket, that's Mohammed Siad. He was at the Kisumu Impala Park. This was a family selfie with sleeping cheetahs in the background. And Mohammed said he had gone there with the family to enjoy themselves while seeing the animals. At the Madeira Caves, this is Charles Mwaniki. He was taking a selfie where the Mau Mau veterans had hidden. He was visiting the caves where our freedom fighters worshipped, he says. And in Malburui, a small town between Malindi and Lamu, this is a photo of Charles Mutema. Charles was posing on the sand dune formations, an incredible sight, and says he was there on vacation. Well, if you want your photos showcased on our Wild Pics segment, all you need to do is like our NTV Wild Facebook page and send a photo that shows you celebrating nature via private message. But remember to include your full name, tell us where the photo was taken, what you were doing and why. So from forensics to prosecutions, the Kenya Wildlife Service is certainly making strides in fighting wildlife crime. But as always, plenty more needs to be done. That's where we leave it on NTV Wild Talk with me, Smriti Vidyarthi. Thanks very much for watching. We'll see you again next Tuesday at 10 p.m. But I'm just going to carry on. Forensic and genetics lab.
Yes.
What am I saying? Wildlife crime. Exactly. And Moses, what perhaps does it take someone, sort of you've come on board, your training, how is that making?
Look at it.
On it to the end of, woo!
Give them to have for 2 seconds, they come to jump.
Rolling?
But sorry, I said let's walk out.
Yeah.
Do I say that?
And then you ask how.
Forensic Lab. Remember to join in the conversation on Twitter. The challenges really is the, I'm so tired, I can't think.
NTV Wild Talk in partnership with the Kenya Wildlife Service and Wildlife Direct.